Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Beth Chats Books. Now today's video is going to be another catch up of recent reads that I have been reading. Some are audiobooks, some are ebooks and some are physical books that I have read over the July period. And I thought I would do a catch up with you of all the things that I've been reading because I have quite a lot of things that I need to read very soon. And I have agreed to do the finals for the non-fiction round. So they haven't come out yet. They will come out at around the end of July when the semi-finals videos are put up and we find out who made it to the finals. So that all is still to come, but that's fast approaching. So I've agreed to do that. And I have two buddy reads / book club reads as well that I'm going to be doing. So I'll talk about them afterwards, but I might as well keep you guys up to date with what I've been reading because I've actually had quite a productive reading period at the moment. So when we last left off, I was currently reading Little Deaths by Emma Flint, which I have finished now, and I have given around 3 out of 5 stars. Now the reason for that was I did mention that there was a little bit of a strange relationship between the journalistic reporter about the case and his infatuation with Ruth, who was accused of murdering her 2 children when their bodies are found after they've gone missing. And the reporter really was a little bit creepy. He kind of became a bit of a fanboy for her, which was a bit strange for me. But the reason why I've given it 3 out of 5 stars is it seemed to just lack that overall magic that a lot of thrillers have, that special something that compels you to keep reading a thriller, that keeps you turning the page, that keeps you really hooked. So my issue was I just did not have that with this book. It lacked some magic quality for me. The writing was quite well and the story was a really intriguing and interesting one to choose, and I liked that it wasn't as clear cut about whether Ruth could have potentially done it because of her behaviour, her relationship to alcohol and her relationships with men. And I thought that was quite interestingly done, but I personally did find the ending predictable. I did guess what was going to happen, and I think it kind of went off in a strange way that it just, overall it was good, but it just didn't get to that level of great, and I want my thrillers to be great, so that's why I have given it 3. And I kind of understand where a lot of the criticism of this book came from when it was released. So then the next book I read was Hagseed by Margaret Atwood. I listened to this on audiobook from the library. So Little Deaths I also listened to as an ebook from the BorrowBox library service, and this was a Audible audiobook from BorrowBox from the library as well, Hagseed. So this has to be, for me, one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. Now, I haven't listened to loads of audiobooks, so before anyone starts criticising me on that, I haven't listened to loads of audiobooks, but the way that this was read, the way that the actor read the voices in this audiobook was so compelling. So the person who narrated this audiobook was R.H. Thompson, and I think he did a really good job of the different voices. His overall tone of voice was very compelling, and I thought this was a really interesting take. Now I have read The Tempest, so I did get the references to The Tempest within The Tempest and how these characters reflected characters from The Tempest. And I found Felix, who is the Prospero character in this book, very interesting, and all the other characters. I really love the bits that focused on the correctional facility that he was working in and these prisoners and how they came to fall in love with Shakespeare and get it and find it relatable, because one of the things I love about Shakespeare is that so many people believe he is just unrelatable, outdated and old and stuffy, and the reality is that Shakespeare really got human nature. He really gets it, and that is universal, and it does transfer very well to a modern audience when somebody takes the time and the care to make sure that the jokes that Shakespeare was saying and the comedic timing and the dramatic timing are all taken into account. And these stories written from these plays, these narratives that are just fantastic, are able to be replicated again and again, and The Tempest is one of those. This idea of revenge and nature versus nurture and all these all the things, colonialism. It's timeless and it's really important, and I love that Margaret Atwood kind of used this book as a love letter to The Tempest. I know this is for the Hogarth Shakespeare series, so obviously she had to pick a Shakespeare play, but I think this was done in a really unique and interesting way, and on audiobook it was so interesting to read. I liked the prison element. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars because I think the idea and the way she set this novel up means that ultimately, once the prisoners have performed The Tempest and he has guided them through that, there isn't really more you can take the plot, especially because it's a realist plot. I know it does play around with the magical elements that are present in The Tempest, and there's a lot of different forms of media used by the prisoners to enhance the play, but it is a realist look, it's not surrealist, and so there wasn't anywhere drastic she could take the plot from there. But I respect this piece of work massively, and I really enjoyed it on audiobook, and I got through it really fast. So that's a 4-star read for me. Then I just have to keep consulting my book journal because I can't really remember what I read now. And then I also read from the library on ebook The Last Bus to Woodstock by Colin Dexter, which is the first in the Inspector Morse series. So this was written in the 70s, and I have read a lot of Goodreads reviews about this book since finishing it that have stated how much they have been disappointed by the misogynistic and the racist language in this book. Now, sorry if I keep doing this with my hands. I finally got my nails done on Tuesday and I'm absolutely loving having nails again, so I'm being quite theatrical with them, but oh well. Just, yeah. So anyway, and I get the point that is being raised by these Goodreads reviewers. There is a lot of racist and sexist language. There's almost this presumption in this book that women during this time were constantly randy, which I never lived through the 70s, so I can't be the person that you ask on this situation. But I presume not. And also that during this time, upon reflecting upon it as a modern feminist and what we've learned through the feminist movement, a lot of women put up with a lot of sexist behaviour to pursue careers and to enhance their careers, and that makes me quite sad. But I have had family members who've explained, as women, have explained situations like that was reflective of the times, or, you know, being wolf whistled was a sign you were good looking, or it was just a given that you'd wear your nice skirt to an interview if a man was interviewing, and I'm not condoning the language in this book, but I think it is very indicative of the time it was written and the social status about these issues at the time it was written. So I kind of parked it to the side in terms of reading the book because I knew that I couldn't ultimately judge it just on that, because I know so many books that came out in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s are ridiculously sexist, misogynistic works of fiction, and we do still read them. So I parked that a little bit when I read it, and I actually did really enjoy the book. I think the thriller was really well thought out, the murder mystery, I really liked Inspector Morse. I thought it was good, you know, and I am compelled to read the series going forward, so I know there is quite a lot of Inspector Morse books, and at the moment I've got a real craving for starting crime thriller series and, you know, getting stuck into many different books and getting back in with the characters and having that connection. So I will go back to it. I have noticed that on the library the second book has been reserved, and I also realised I needed to check myself a little bit because I read Dark Pines and I also have the second 2 books in that and I haven't read them. I'm currently now on audiobook finishing the last of the Sherlock Holmes because I started reading that earlier in the year and stopped, maybe earlier in the year, maybe over 2 years or 3 years. I've had the audiobook for quite a long time now, the definitive collection, and I haven't got around to finishing it, so that I'm listening to the Return of Sherlock Holmes, which is the 3rd or 4th series. It's a series of short stories, but the 3rd or 4th instalment in the Sherlock saga. And then I will go back, but yeah, in a nutshell, enjoyed it and I do want to continue with it. But yeah, if obscene racism and sexist language is just going to put you off, and that's something that you want to know from the off before you even bother, then don't read this series. Next book I read was Talking with Psychopaths and Savages Beyond Evil, A Deeper Journey into the Minds of the Most Cold-Blooded Killers by Christopher Berry D. Now, I really wanted to enjoy this because I really like true crime and I'm really interested in criminology and psychology and how the brain works, especially serial killers as well. They quite interest me, but this was written very, very poorly. So I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. There are multiple spelling mistakes. The author comes across as a blokey bloke and he writes like a blokey bloke. So there are a lot of profanities and swear words in the text. There's a lot of judgment on the killers in the text. Now, that sounds like a stupid thing to say because a lot of people will say, they're serial killers, Beth. Why wouldn't we judge them? But when I've read academic texts, there has always been a distance between the writer and the subject matter, and there's always been that professional level of trying to understand why somebody behaves as they behave, not just to call them quote-unquote dickheads, which is what basically Christopher Berry D says in this book. And aside from all that, I finished reading the book and I just couldn't really understand where the main argument was for this book. So it was trying to tell us ultimately that he has all the knowledge and expertise. He'll be able to tell you whether this killer is organised or disorganised, what motivates them to do it, and their back history. But really it was almost like he compiled a couple of serial killers that he hadn't mentioned in his other books and decided to throw them into this book with no overarching theme. So they had nothing in common in terms of their MO or whether they were disorganised or organised. He also plugs his other books extensively in this book, talks about all the other serial killers, and if you want to learn about them, buy his other book. And he talks randomly throughout the book about the Philippines and how he enjoys travelling there, which had nothing to do with the book. And then he just tells us all the gruesome tales of the book, which we could have got from Google, and proceeds to say what an arsehole this person is. So if you're academically inclined, don't pick this up because you will learn nothing apart from who they killed. Not even why, just who they killed. And, you know, if you wanted to read something like Serial Killers on the Beach, because my dad seems to enjoy reading true crime on the beach on holiday, and you don't want to think and you just want to read it, that's fine. But also I would give a massive warning for this book that there are some horrendous murders in here, very graphic, necrophilia, cannibalism, mutilation, rape, dismemberments of body parts, just every nasty thing you can think of. Somebody's done it in this book, so if you're really squeamish, just don't bother picking it up either. But I gave that 2 out of 5 stars, and I will not read anything else really that he's written because it's not to my taste. And then the next book I read was The Bass Rock, or Bass Rock, I don't know how we're saying that, by E.V. Wild. And I was actually quite disappointed by this book. I've recently finished this one on the library ebook service. So the Serial Killers one, I did actually have the text to hand because my dad was reading it, so I had the physical copy. He bought that a few summers ago. But really the rest of them have been ebooks. Yeah, and this is another ebook that I took from the library. So I noticed that it'd come on the library and it was brand new, and I thought, oh wow, this will be really exciting because this is really current, this novel, and I've heard so many people say such great things. So Jen over at Jen Campbell's YouTube channel, Mercedes over at Mercy's Bookish Musings, Simon over at Savage Reads, they've all loved this book, so I was really excited to read this. But the way that it is structured, the way that the form is on the page, is quite difficult because you will be reading 3 or 4 pages into the chapter before you realise which woman we're talking about. So it follows 3 women, Ruth, Vivian and Sarah. And it is kind of an exploration of men's violence against women, women's position, how women feel about things like motherhood and marriage, and women's relationship to abuse and alcohol, and physical and mental abuse. And the stories interweave, but I did find them hard to differentiate from one another, and the writing style was very much the same for the three of them, so I couldn't really find the inner voice very well. And in some ways, Vivian and Ruth's story is very similar because they end up at different stages living in the same house, intergenerational, but loosely. And I find it really hard to differentiate their two stories because it was almost a very similar character that Ruth and Vivian played. They were both disillusioned and single women, and then there was sporadically mention of ghosts in the house, which really wasn't developed strongly enough for me for it to be a theme or for it to be symbolic of something else. And a lot of the characters weren't developed very clearly. For example, Betty is the maid in the novel under Ruth's story, but Vivian knew Betty. And Vivian's mum is Bernadette, who was Betty's niece. And Betty and Bernadette were almost irreplaceable to me, considering one was a maid and one was her younger niece. As characters in both Vivian's and Ruth's story, they could almost be interchangeable. There wasn't really much development. Maybe that's just me personally, but I was quite disappointed. So I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. 3.5, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but didn't really enjoy that one. So what I'm currently reading now is, like I said, I'm reading Sherlock Holmes's The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which is a collection of short stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, and I'm listening to that on Audible because I still have that credit. I am also going to start reading today Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier, which I am buddy reading this with Emma over at Novelle Novels. And so we are doing around 50 pages a day. So I'm going to start it today and finish it on Friday. So I'm really excited to get to this because I really wanted to read this anyway. Then I have Robert from Barter Horse is doing a book club, and I'll link it down below if you want to join Voxer, where we're going to be discussing it. But we're reading it from the 1st of August and discussing it on the 22nd of August. And that is Paris Trout by Pete Dexter. I literally don't know anything about this. This is quite an old modern classic as such, I believe. So it was written in 1988, and it is about the horrific events of a summer's day in Cotton Point, Georgia, by the social fabric of the sleepy little place. So some of the townspeople thought Paris Trout a hero for what he did, others that the law should make him pay. Without any doubt, he changed people in the town where they lived. I think he's accused of a murder. It's quite lengthy, that blurb. So I can't really discern where it talks about that. It's talking about love and violence in the Deep South in the 1950s. And I know that some people said that it's written quite strangely. I was looking on Goodreads and some people found the style very hard to get into. But I'm really excited to read that. And I didn't really mention what this was about, but it's kind of the inspiration behind the painting on the front cover and the relationship between the artist and the subject matter. So she's kind of made a fiction loosely based on that. And then one of my colleagues at work has lent me The Holiday by T.M. Logan. Now, this has been raved about recently as the best thriller out there at the moment, or one of the best this year. I don't know much about it, but I know that they go on holiday. It says that Kate suspects her husband is having an affair, and the other woman is one of her best friends. And I think there's some secrets revealed in the villa that they stay at on holiday. So when I get round to reading this, I will let you guys know. I'm also reading, I'm going to make sure I get this one right as well, reading A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Nepal. I started just reading the prologue to that last night, and that seems really good. And I am also going to be reading Love After Love by Ingrid Persard. Both of those I wanted to read more literature written in the Caribbean, and I think both of those are set in the Caribbean, but I don't know much about them, so I'll probably talk more about them once I've finished in a wrap up. I just realised that I forgot to tell you that I read James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. I literally finished that yesterday. I read it in one full day. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I think it was amazing. I can really see where Swimming in the Dark, which is a book that I read earlier in the year, took a lot of inspiration from. So it follows Giovanni and David falls in love with Giovanni while he's living in Paris, and he's an American, but he has a girlfriend called Hella, And he's struggling with his identity and his sexuality, so he falls in love with Giovanni and then realises that this just can't work, and he leaves him, and Hella, who was travelling alone in Spain, comes back to Paris and he asks her to marry him, and then that all goes to pot because she says yes, and they start to think about that, and then he realises that he can't escape his sexuality. In the meantime, Giovanni goes back to an old employer who is also gay, who gave him a job a few months back, but who's always been trying to sleep with him. He tells him he'll give him a job back if he sleeps with him. He sleeps with him, and the employer has conned him to having sex with him, and Giovanni then murders him. So at the end of the book, David's reflecting on the loss of Hella because she ends up leaving him, realising his sexuality. He tells her the truth and she leaves, and that Giovanni is going to be executed for his crime of murder, because in Paris at the time it was the death penalty. It is a really interesting book that is timeless in terms of its subject matter. So it was written in 1956 and it was the second of James Baldwin's books, and I have fallen in love with James Baldwin through this novel, so I really want to go through his back catalogue. Obviously I want to read more diversely, hence why I've got V.S. Nepal as well down, because he is heralded as well as a great black author. This is interesting because this is one of the only works of Baldwin's that involves an all-white character cast for his novels. This book is so interesting about the idea of love and loss and sexuality and identity, and it's so rich. I was blown away by it, and I think it should be a set text for all LGBTQIA plus individuals, and it should be at schools, and it's just such a short little novel, but it's packed with so much going on about those things, and I just thought some passages in it were utterly beautiful. But I think it will be on my favourite books of the year video when I put that up towards the end of the year, and so I'll probably talk about it in a bit more detail then. So there's that, and then I've got two other books that I might read as well, which is The Offing by Benjamin Myers, which I don't know if you can see it there. Which my auntie has sent to me from Amazon. She said it was her favourite book this year. It says it follows a summer in World War II, where Robert Appleyard sets out on foot for his Durham village. 16, the son of a coal miner, he makes his way across the northern countryside until he reaches the former smuggling village of Robin Hood's Bay. There he meets Dulcie, an eccentric, worldly other woman who lives in a ramshackle cottage facing out to sea, and she introduces him to the pleasures of rich food, sea swimming, sunburn and poetry. The two come from different worlds, yet as the summer months pass they form an unlikely friendship that will profoundly alter their lives. So sounds brilliant. And then also my mother has given me this little very short book called Address Unknown by Cressman Taylor. And my mum says it's a series of letters between two individuals who were friends just during the lead up to World War II. And then the friend finds out that the other friend is Jewish and disconnects conversations, but this is a scattering of their letters. So it says here, written on the eve of the Holocaust is a series of letters between an American Jew and his German friend. Address Unknown is a haunting tale of immense and enduring impact, exposing the poison of Nazism. This memorable story survives in an age of racial, ethnic and nationalistic intolerance as a searing reminder that history can repeat itself. This is a non-fiction. I believe these are true letters. I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't actually reference on the inside of the cover whether they are or whether it's just an imagination, whether it's a fiction as such, not an imagination. That's a bit cruel to say that, but I'll have to read it and let you know. But my mother said that it was absolutely phenomenal, so I will give this a read, because I do actually need to return this to her quite soon because she wants to give it to another friend. So that's everything. I'm really sorry that was very scattered between books that I'm reading and books that I've read and books that I might read, so it was all a bit higgledy-piggledy, but I completely forgot until I started talking about the other books that I'd read, Giovanni's Room, because I had literally finished it last night. So there we go, they're all the mishmash of books I've read, might read and are currently reading. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video.